Welcome. My name is Sammy Gleason, and I'm the From the Land of Kansas Marketing Coordinator with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. We are excited you have joined the Specialty Crop Lunch and Learn. This program is made possible by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant. The Specialty Crop Block Grant makes funds available to state departments of agriculture solely to enhance the competitiveness of specialty crops. According to the USDA, specialty crops are defined as fruits, vegetables, tree nuts, dried fruit, horticulture, and nursery crops, including floriculture. Also, the Kansas Department of Agriculture is currently accepting applications for the 2022 Specialty Crop Block Grant. Complete applications must be sent to the Kansas Department of Agriculture no later than 5 p.m. Central Time on March 31st. Please find the link in the chat if you're interested and submit an application. Now I'm going to turn it over to my coworker, Janelle Dobbins, to review some housekeeping items before we get started. Janelle?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Sammy said, I'm Janelle Dobbins. I'm the marketing manager with the From the Land of Kansas program. And I know you've all been on lots of Zoom, so you probably know these, but I'm just going to go through a couple of quick housekeeping things for you. During the presentation portion, please make sure to keep your microphone muted unless you're asking a question. If you do have a question during the presentation, feel free to just submit the question using the chat box. The submitted questions and comments will be monitored by KDA and will be asked and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and the recordings will be available for a limited time due to our contractual obligations with our speakers. But the videos include copyrighted content are made available just for viewing with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. So please do not record, sell, distribute, or share these videos on social media sites. Recordings will be available by 5 p.m. this Friday for this session. We will also be dropping in the link to the chat to register for next week's webinar that will be at the same time on Tuesday at noon, and it's called Growing Your Passion with Profit in the Floral Industry. And you'll also be able to view the recording in that same area. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sammy to introduce our speaker, which I know you're all excited about hearing from today.
Thank you, Janelle. We have an exciting 6-week webinar series planned for you. Today we have Ben Hartman, author of The Lean Farm. Ben and his wife, Rachel Hirschenberger, own and operate Clay Bottom Farm in Goshen, Indiana, where they make their living growing specialty crops on less than 1 acre. Ben has developed an online course in lean farming, which can be found at claybottomfarm.com. With that, I will turn it over to you, Ben.
All right, well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me here. And if my understanding is correct, we're gonna play this video for about 40 minutes, and then I'll be here afterwards to take 10 or 15 minutes of questions.
Hello, it's a pleasure for me to be here. And thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm glad you're able to take, each of you take time out of your busy schedules to listen to me for about half hour, 45 minutes here, talk about how we do it, how we make a living on a small farm here. Ben Hartman is my name. I'm the author of these 2 books. And I am a consultant for USAID on development projects and do quite a bit of public speaking and offer workshops and an online course. And all this is and more is available at claybottomfarm.com. Gonna jump right into it here and explain first of all what I mean by lean. Lean is a Japanese production system. It's focused on eliminating waste instead of constant expansion to grow a business. And by now, lean is a popular globally used system. Nonprofits, hospitals, farms, a lot of different types of businesses and people in all kinds of diverse industries are using these concepts because waste is in every work environment. Capacity equals work plus waste. This is the algebraic formula that's at the heart of the lean system. And I'll refer back to this later in the presentation, but the basic idea is that your capacity is your ability to get work accomplished, to make a product that sells. And there are 2 ingredients according to lean. There's work that adds value to your product, and there's waste. or all the activities on your farm that you do in the course of a day that don't actually add value to your product. And I can tell you that certainly on our farm and certainly in the early years, there was quite a bit of waste in the formula. And the challenge here, it's a really simple formula idea that you simply take the waste and root out the waste. You learn to recognize waste, get rid of it as a very powerful way to grow your capacity and to grow your business without having to invest thousands of dollars in your business or grow food on thousands of acres. So I wanted to show this just to prove, just to show you that we don't always do things in the most efficient way on our farm, and that it's okay, even if you use the lean system, to be inefficient every so often. You have to have, you don't want to throw all your values out the window here. The idea is to incorporate lean so you can have time to spend with your kids, go fishing or work on hobbies and projects, take care of your mental health. So you have time to live a balanced life. Okay, I'm going to give a couple of examples of lean in action. First, we're going to go back to 1865 in Alabama. And this is after the Civil War. It had ended, and a model used for agriculture at the time was sharecropping, which essentially translates to farming land that you do not own. So a share of your crop you would perhaps keep, and the other share would go to the landowner. And at that time, in the southern part of the United States, it was cotton production. And you can see that in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, these are heavy cotton producing states, and very little else actually was grown. This is the primary cash crop. And so what happened was the land was leached by this cotton production. And for a lot of farmers, land was divided and subdivided until their land holdings were very small, smaller than 20 acres oftentimes. And so farmers were forced to do more with less, which is obviously an idea that fits very well within lean. So how they did it was they worked together. They formed groups. The Southern Tenant Farmers Union would be one group, so that they can farm more efficiently and can advocate for themselves. And they learn from one another. My favorite example is this Tuskegee Institute experiment station. George Washington Carver is pictured on the left here, and he's often considered the peanut farmer. And it's true that he did a lot to promote the growth of peanuts, but he did more than that too. He taught farmers to diversify their farms beyond cotton, to produce and peanuts and corn, lots of other crops. And he pioneered a no waste approach to farming. And it made a very meaningful impact on farmers at that time, and it still, his influence still carries on. Look what he demonstrated at the Tuskegee Institute: 4,000 pounds of corn in fodder, 1,000 pounds of hay, in addition to vegetables, could all be grown to earn a living on just 6 acres of land. And he taught market gardening classes in the early 1900s at Tuskegee. And so he's looked to as a model in lean circles. And this is the quote I start my book off with: is turning waste into useful channels should be the slogan of every farmer. And a protege of his, Smaller and Smarter, is the way the farmer makes a profit. And so the Black farming tradition in the US is one place to get a lot of inspiration for lean thinking and lean on farms. We can also go to Japan. And after World War II, this is what a lot of the industry would have looked like. Lean was a bombed out, or Japan was a bombed out country at the time. And we had bombed the factories in Japan. They had, if you're going to be a company like Toyota, Toyota is looked to as a model of lean. There are no stable suppliers making parts for their vehicles. They had very little capital with which to invest in their business. And there's very limited market for cars in Japan at the time. They're in a deep economic depression. And yet, look at their competition. They had giant automated factories in the US to compete against. Ford, GM, and Chrysler had a run on the international automobile market for decades. And as you might know, a lot of crappy vehicles were produced and sold all over the world for many decades until fairly recent, in the late 70s and 1980s, Toyota caught up with these US manufacturers and eventually became the world's #1 auto manufacturer. Now, how did they do it? Because they're at such a disadvantage. Well, they use lean thinking. So this is Teiichi Ono in the corner here. And he said they wanted to set a goal for Toyota, catch the US in terms of productivity of their workers within 3 years. And we're going to do it with who we have, which is to say with rice farmers who, and descendants of rice farmers who are those who are working in Toyota factories. In fact, the initial spelling of Toyota has a D at the end and translates roughly to fertile rice fields. And so necessity was the mother of invention. And I am going to later in the presentation show you the 4 steps that Toyota took to overcome their competition and how we applied those on our farm. So 3rd story here, we're going to go to Indiana, 2006, and our own farm story begins with humble beginnings. My wife and I, after we married, we bought this flat roof Adobe style house. You should never build a house with a flat roof unless you're in the southern part of the US or Latin America, perhaps. Not a good idea in northern Indiana. That tends to leak. And so we paid just a nickel for this house, and we had quite a bit of fixing up to do and spent 3 years actually fixing up the house. And so my background is I'd gone to college. I grew up on a corn, soybean, and cattle farm. Had gone to college, got a philosophy degree and an English degree too, which is actually fairly useful on a farm. I talk English all the time and love to philosophize, get on a high horse. And Rachel, we both grew up in Mennonite households, and she grew up with a giant garden, did a lot of canning, and that was important for both of our families, is growing food. And so what we did was we started by growing food in the yard next to our house. This was actually a clay bottom tennis court that was in the yard of the house. And we tilled in that tennis court and planted vegetables. You can see how young and happy and probably a bit naive we are here. But we started selling vegetables at an 8-foot table at our local farmer's market. And so we began as an urban farm, and we rented other yards for a couple of years. And eventually we had 6 or 8 plots around town we were managing, and it was working sort of. We were able to scratch out a bit of income from it. We had off-farm jobs at the time, and we wondered, what if we actually had a farm? A dentist needs to have a dentist office to perform her work or his work, and maybe a farmer should have a farm. And so what we did was we bought this 5-acre Amish dairy farm and proceeded to convert it into a place where we could grow vegetables. And I quit my job at this point too, and just went all in and said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to invest our full energy here. And our goal was to grow as fast as we could. And we worked hard. And I'll skip a bunch of years of pain and suffering to say that our early production system was low tech. It was backbreaking, and we were making it, but barely. It was not terribly profitable in those early years. And this thing happened. One afternoon, there's a gale force wind that blew one of our greenhouses onto the barn roof. And Rachel was in that. We were both in the house at the time, and Rachel heard a thunk, ran to the window to see what was going on, and saw this thing on the roof. And she said, Ben, you better get over here. And I ran to the window, took one peek, and ran straight to the fridge and grabbed a couple of Heinekens. And we really sat down and had to think over whether this whole project was going to work or not. And we were, to be honest, at the point of questioning whether we should get out. And within a week, I'll tell you what happened is one of our customers wrote us a check for an amount that equaled about the cost of a new greenhouse. She said, we want you to keep going, and here's what we can do to help. One of our restaurant chefs emailed me and said, hey, I heard about what happened to the greenhouse, and if you build another greenhouse, let me know. I'll come up and help you put it up. And so at the time, we were questioning whether we should do this thing or not. And our customers and our community around us seem to be telling us, you should keep going. And so we did. We built that greenhouse and we kept going, but we said, we're going to do it a little differently this time. We're going to lean up and focus our efforts and try to be smarter in how we work. And one of our CSA customers at the time sent an email to me and said, hey, we've been using this thing called the lean system in our factory, and it's just the bee's knees. It's really turned our ship around here. And we think I think it could work on a farm too. And could I come out and offer some coaching sessions to you? And Rachel and I sort of rolled our eyes, and we're more than a bit skeptical at first, because how would a factory-based system work on a small scale, organic, kind of hippie, sustainable farm? And but we were intrigued also by this idea of not wasting anything, because there was so much waste, even on our small scale, supposedly sustainable farm. We were throwing away a lot of plastic, wasting a lot of time. And we thought, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And so we thought, okay, let's simplify our vision here. Instead of trying to go from 5 acres to 10 acres, 20 acres and get bigger and become a quote unquote real farmer, what if we said, okay, on an acre of land is 43,000 square feet, and you need to walk on that 1 acre, so devote 1/3 of an acre in paths. It leaves you with about 30,000 square feet on which to grow food. Head of lettuce, we grew a lot of lettuce at that time, so let's do a little math with lettuce. A head of lettuce takes up a square foot, and you can grow easily 2 crops one growing season. With a hoop house, certainly 3 or 4 in one season. And so with 2 crops, we should be able to gross 60,000 on at $2. I'm sorry, at $2 a head. With 2 crops, we should be able to grow over $100,000 an acre with lettuce. It's the simplest crop there is to grow. Pests don't go after it very much. It tends to have low fertility needs. And yet, why weren't we able to achieve these kinds of numbers? Well, there are some practical problems with farming with pencil and paper. First is, what chef is going to want 60,000 heads of lettuce at one time? There's weather to contend with, and there's crop losses of all kinds. And yet, this simple vision kind of stuck in our crawl. We thought there has to be a way to at least come close to this. And I'll get into how we go about our farming in a minute. But first, a bit more of an introduction. We're a 4-season specialty crop farm in northern Indiana. Their 16th year of operation. We have 2 part-time staff who work with us. We have a crazy local commitment where all of our food ends up within 1.5 miles of the farm. And we've become a sort of behind-the-scenes farm for some restaurants in town and a co-op in town. We have a small CSA that we run too. Work about 35 hours a week, half-acre of produce, and we have a few focus crops, and use the lean system to organize our work. Our top focus crops are baby greens and tomatoes. And most of our incomes comes from these 2. And like I said, we have a small CSA, so we grow a full range from carrots to onions and peppers and other crops. But most of our effort goes into these 2 crops here, which is what works in our particular market. We are certainly not perfect. I chose the nicest and best pictures for the presentation. But you can certainly find crop failures, and we make all kinds of mistakes. But I'll show you some pictures here. Rachel and I, in our tomato greenhouse, we grow about 600 tomatoes every year. Here are our kids on the first day of school. There's a before, and you can see how happy they are to be going back to school. This would be one of our hoop houses here. We have 2 tunnels. And in this one here, we have tomatoes and some salad crops growing between the rows of tomatoes to make sure that every square foot counts. Margold is our #1 tomato, and we sell lots of boxes of those in these 10-pound boxes, which seems to be popular with our restaurants. Kale would be another green that we grow, staple crop, and with the right fertility system, you can grow them as tall as you. Metrics that we use. We say crops should yield $3 a square foot or more, or maybe we shouldn't grow the crop. And that's quite simply how we focused from growing a wide range, 80 varieties one season, to really focusing on just a few varieties that work particularly well. We say $40 should fit into one of our harvesting totes. That encourages to keep the focus on high dollar value and lightweight and smaller size crops. So you won't see a lot of watermelon, butternut squash and such on our farm. And crops should go from field to cooler at a rate of $100 an hour. That means from the time a worker grabs a knife and starts a harvest to the point at which the crop is placed back into a cooler, ready to go, or in a van, ready to go to a customer, were they able to harvest at a rate of $100 an hour? And sales activities, were we able to sell our crop at a rate of about $300 an hour, which is to say, from the time the van leaves to the time it comes home, could we drop off that amount of food in an hour of time? Okay, now we don't always meet these metrics. Sometimes we well exceed the metrics, but they help give us focus so that we know we're headed in the right direction. Okay, I said I'd share a bit how Toyota did it, and it's really a simple 4-step process. I'll share those 4 steps, and I won't talk too much about how Toyota implemented those steps, but I'll show you how we did it on our farm. First, they got organized with 5S. You want to be ruthless, get rid of anything non-essential in your workplace. Number 2, precisely identify value. Get this information from your customers. Keep your own, incorporate your own values too, but your customers should be pulling your product from the farm. Third step, cut out the Muda. Anything that's not adding value for your crop. Muda is a rough translation for waste. Should be held under suspicion. And fourth would be, let's practice Kaizen, continuously improve every year. Okay, step number 1, how we did the 5S, how we organized our farm, was that we decluttered. And I show you some rules here. First, we had to define a clear workspace boundary. Where was work and where was home? We had to get the fishing tackle out of the tool shed and know where work began. And so we literally had a map and drew some lines, and work did say that, okay, in this workspace boundary, we're going to have just what we need and no more. Get rid of anything not used almost every week for adding value. You've heard of Marie Kondo and her organizing method. Usefulness is the metric here for lean. Which tools did you touch and use the previous growing season? And those are the ones you probably want to keep next season. And anything else you probably want to hold under suspicion. You want to get rid of items unused, don't squirrel them into corners. And simplest is best. Find just a few number of tools to get the most work accomplished. If you've gone to farm conferences or even cracked open any seed catalog lately, you've seen that there are just thousands of tools now, even in the last 10 years, that are available to farmers that didn't exist a generation ago. And the reality is you probably don't need them. You probably actually need, probably you'll use 10 or fewer tools in the course of your growing season that add value for you. And the rest of your tools probably bog down your work and are eating into your bottom line. So the challenge is to find the most valuable 10 tools on your farm and consider getting rid of the rest. Okay, so here's some before and after pictures here. You can see that in 2006 to 2008 or 9, in those years, we thought we were going to collect every tool made in Indiana and in Pitchfork, and we just had dozens of these hand tools, and we thought we'd have to keep every scrap of a wire and electrical wire or whatever that we use and not get rid of anything. And the reality is keeping all that stuff around was bogging down our work. We're Mennonites, we hate to get rid of things. So we spent a long time finding good homes for everything. But in the end, it made our work much easier and more pleasant to do once we picked those 10 tools and got rid of everything else. And the rule here is that, and I say 10 tools, it's That's an oversimplification. Every farm will need the right number is going to be different on every farm. But a tool should be in its place or in your hand or a worker's hands, and there should be no third option. So you want to step 2 is setting your farm in order. If you come to our farm, you'll see a lot of magnets and tool hooks. We spread tools out where we use them. We don't keep a centralized tool storage area. Keep tools at eye level where you can see them, so that if a 10-year-old would, this is a 10-year-old test. 10-year-old comes onto your farm, and you should be able to say, hey, Sammy, go grab the shovel for me, or go grab the pitchfork. And that 10-year-old should be able to find it easily, quickly, and retrieve it easily, just through vision. You shouldn't have to say it's in the barn in the second door to the left. They should be able to, in the middle of your farm, look around and find that tool, okay? And this makes it easy for new workers and volunteers to come onto your farm and be more effective, productive. So we're storing tools and supplies too, row covers and hoses, right on the greenhouse, in a shed, right on the greenhouse instead of in a separate location. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm skipping a couple of these 5S steps. Gonna go to the 5th step of the 5S system here, and to say that you want to sustain this work by using pictures. This is a picture that we hang in our processing room. And when workers are done washing 100 pounds of lettuce, for instance, we'll say, hey, make it look like what the picture is here. And that's all the instruction we need to give. They can see where the nets get stored, and how the scales are stored, and the towels and whatnot. Yeah, so you want to make the other 5S steps, sorting, setting in order, shining, to be routine, part of your everyday work. And you want to perform this work in a short, high frequent basis, not a long, low frequent basis. So what that means is the time to make the processing room look like what the picture is on a daily basis, okay? It's not on a monthly basis, and it's not on a seasonal basis. Every day at the end of the work day, ideally your farm gets, we use an expression, take it to zero. Your workspace that you define, like I said, we draw a boundary on our workspace, take it to zero within that workspace on a daily basis, so you're ready and set up for the next day's production. So here's another picture of a hosing station. Okay, step number 2 is value. So you've organized your farm, and the Lean Farm book has a lot more detailed step-by-step instruction on using that 5S system. But number 2 is precisely identify value. This is information that you get from your customers, and then pivot once you got that information. So look at the three questions in the middle boxes. What do they want? When do they want it? How much do they want? This is how you increase value, is to get precise answers to those 3 questions. So here, Jesse, one of the chefs that we sell to, Jesse and I sit down every winter, and we have a conversation that circles around those 3 questions. And I do this with our other chefs, and a version with our CSA customers, and with our with the grocery store that we sell to too. I will ask them, what do you want? And be specific. I don't let them off the hook easy. They say they want bulb fennel. I'll say, do you want the tops left on? Should I cut off the tops? How many inches of tops do you want? Do you want the roots left on? How big of a bulb would you like? When do you want it delivered? I tell you, a lot of restaurants, there's actually a narrow window of time that's optimal for them. 5 o'clock is too late. Customers are already coming in the door. But in the morning is too early. They often don't have staff in some restaurants, don't show up until mid-afternoon. So there might be a window of, say, noon to 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. That is optimal for these restaurants for you to deliver to them. And that's a value-added service, and will allow you to add value to your product, which allows you to charge more. Okay, and then we figure out how much is optimal for them to receive on a weekly basis. And so, long story short, after a couple of conversations, I have a stack of 6 or so of these value sheets, and that's what I can use to design my farm. And so then I can get out the charts, I can open up the seed catalogs, and I can start to construct the growing season. This is all winter work, okay? This isn't We don't order seeds that look fun to grow to us, plant them, and then hope we have customers or push our product out onto the marketplace. Instead, we're a reverse order farm. We collect orders as much as practical beforehand and let customers pool the product from our farm. It's a push versus a pool system. Two very different ways of thinking about your business. And a pool system is a very powerful way to minimize waste, especially the waste of overproduction or growing crops for which you don't have a market. I tell you what happened with the pandemic is that we had lined up with several chefs that we would grow tomatoes. And so here I'm transplanting about 600 tomatoes in a greenhouse. And Rachel heard the news in the house that the restaurants they're shutting down the restaurants. It was early on in the pandemic, and that we would not have a market for all these tomatoes we planned on. And so we thought, oh no, what are we going to do? We certainly stopped transplanting tomatoes. But what we did was get on the phone to some potential CSA customers, and we asked them a version of those 3 questions. Well, what crops would you like if we're going to scale up a CSA this year? What crops would you like? When would you like them? How much per week? And we constructed a CSA based around those answers to those 3 questions. And it's a high value CSA. We delivered them the food directly to people's porch. And it was a no waste CSA too. And we still run this program where we deliver food to coolers that people set on their porch. And so we're not paying for CSA boxes, not paying for packaging for our food. We're simply harvesting the food and dropping it in the cooler. With the case of baby greens, we'll ask the customer to put a Tupperware of the size that they want in the cooler, and then we'll put the greens into that Tupperware container. And so instead of tomatoes, we started growing turnips and basil and green beans and onions and other crops that you see here. Okay, third step in this 4-part lean system is tackling the Muda. So Muda, remember, is translation for waste, the Japanese word for waste. And Taiichi Ohno at Toyota discovered that, or he proposed that every workspace has 7 Mudas. Okay, the first 7 here: waste of overproduction, waiting waste when crops are sitting around, not moving closer to your customer; waste of transportation, driving around your product too much; over processing your product; too much inventory, supplies and tools and etc. on hand; the waste of defect, when you have product failures, in our case crop failures; waste of motion, taking too many steps, too many actions between seed to cash, which would be the continuum on a farm. When you order seeds, then you plant and tend those crops and harvest the crops to the point at which you sell the crop and receive cash. How many steps did it take? And can you minimize or reduce those steps? And then a newer waste is overburdening. When we're workers working too hard, so that mistakes started to creep into your system, or when we're tools breaking, when we're machines overstressed. And MURI is the term for this type of waste. I don't have time to go into detail on all of these, but I do want to show you how we implemented a few of them. With the waiting and transportation waste, we asked ourselves, well, when is our crop, when is our lettuce and tomatoes sitting on our farm and not moving closer physically to our customers? When are we standing around not adding value? And what we decided to do was to actually eliminate our walk-in cooler. And instead, virtually all of our crops are delivered at the time they're harvested. Our turnaround time last year was less than 4 hours of time. In other words, from the point at which we have collected all the orders and begin our harvest to the point at which we deliver food, we can do that faster than your average Amazon truck, 4 hours at a time, which is highly appreciated by chefs. They want to be lean and nimble, just like we do. And this allows them to do it and allows us to charge more for our crops too. So here's an example. We're going to harvest tomatoes, put them directly into our delivery vehicle and drive straight to the restaurants within 4 hours time. And it saves us from having to store the tomatoes into a tomato cooler And it saves all the waste that happens in coolers. Coolers are very wasteful, Muda prone spaces where mold happens and there's mislabeling and disorganization. So we just cut all that out of the farm and harvest and deliver the crop. There are some exceptions. We do have a small cooler. If we go to a farmer's, when the summer, we'll sometimes still go to a farmer's market with our excess, and cooler will hold the crop overnight before going to market. But for the most part, CSA and restaurant and wholesale accounts, we're going to deliver as soon as we pick. That with our defect waste, we found that most of the defect in our crops was happening at the beginning and the early stages of the time looking. In other words, at the seedling stage, that's when the most care is required, and you can waste a lot of time and a lot of money when seeds don't germinate, and when they're properly handled in the propagation house. So we realize we need to step up our game here. And just to give you one tip or idea is to use an Inkbird, which is an external thermostatic device here. Amazon sells them, they're less than $30 a piece. And we plug a crock pot into that external thermostat, and the thermostat has a probe that we run inside of a upright chest freezer, and that tells the crock pot to turn on or off at whatever temperature we've set. And so in effect, we're creating a really warm, moist environment where the temperature is very precise, and we can get 100%, near 100% germination from our seeds in here. And of course, there's no light, so you'll need to keep an eye on your seeds. As soon as they pop, we'll pull them from here, and then out they go to the propagation house or under a set of grow lights. Waste of motion. The essential question you want to ask, well, the way to think about this is your farm is a plate of spaghetti noodles, where you're moving around all the time. And you want to ask, can you shorten, straighten, or eliminate, ideally eliminate, any of those noodles? Just give you one example from a field, how we apply this idea to field management. What we were doing was plowing or tilling in an old crop, and then seeding a cover crop. Then you'd pack in those seeds with a cultivator. We'd have to mow the cover crop once it came up. And then we'd have to plow or till in that cover crop. And then probably do another round of a light tillage for seed bed preparation. And so we had at least 6 passes, what I call field passes, before our seed would go in. And we'd have a turnaround time of 3 to 6 months and work time of 1 to 2 hours. I'm not opposed to cover crops. They make a lot of sense in a lot of situations. However, in our case, they were sinking our business. We just frankly couldn't afford the time, and the seed costs were going up too. And we wondered if there was another way to manage our soil fertility. So now what we do is we mow an old crop. In the case of carrots, obviously we'll just remove the carrot, but or turnips and radishes, but a lot of crops will just mow the old crop. We'll cover with a tarp. And this is a way of, quote, burning the crop. You could also burn the crop with torches. We prefer the tarp method. And then we'll add compost if needed, 1 or 2 inches, leaving it on the surface, and grow our next crop. And so what we have is a turnaround time of 30 minutes or less per 100 square foot growing space, much faster turnaround time, and much quicker to do. And so here, I show you some pictures. You can see this in action. We have someone weed whacking a crop. And you can mow your crop with lawn mowers or scythes or weed eaters, whatever you have on hand. And we're going to tarp the crop and do a bit of raking if we have to, a bit of compost amending if we have to. Usually we don't do either. Usually we don't need to rake. Usually we don't need to add compost. And then we'll direct seed the next crop or transplant the next crop. And 21 days after that previous photo was taken, we have a crop ready to harvest. Okay, so we have quick turnaround time and less work. And fewer weeds too, because every time that you till 2 inches deep or more, you're just bringing weed seeds up to the surface. If you keep your compost on the surface, if you're not pulling your roots up out of the ground, you're not disrupting soil life, microbial activity, goes through the roof, and your weeds stay dormant and buried. So after just a season or two, you can achieve a virtually weed-free farm if you're careful and diligent. So here, my son was cutting kale in the previous image, and that kale's been cut. We're going to leave the roots right in the ground and transplant some lettuces here. Here we're same principle. On the left, we've got an old, probably spinach crop that was cut, tarped, and we're going to do nothing else, just going to transplant our next crop. And I like this system because it's a gentler way to farm, and it's leaner too. It's quicker to do. In the summertime, we will we will use shade cloth over the lettuces and crops that might need a bit of cover from the summer heat for the first couple of weeks, and then we'll let them grow in the full sun. Okay, so how we build soils on new beds is add a lot of compost, to be honest, and it's really not much more complex than that. And we make our own compost with leaves and grass clippings that the city delivers to us, and I turn them 3 times before using them. It's not a hot composting method. It's a slow, or it's a cold composting method, but it works because our leaves and grass clippings don't have a lot of weed seeds within them. If you're receiving materials that have a lot of weed, high weed counts, then you want to get that pile up to 141, 131 Fahrenheit for a couple of days to burn out those weed seeds. And just 3 turns seems to be enough. We're not aiming for perfection here. Then we'll spread, often using a tool like this here. So you can use wheelbarrows and do this by hand, and we did that for several years. And I actually do this in the wintertime now when the ground is frozen. And it's an efficient way to spread compost. But whatever means you have on hand to move this bulk onto your property, onto your land, I recommend 6 to 8 inches of compost that first year if you have pretty poor soils. And I'm not dogmatic about carbon. I think your job as a farmer is to source low-cost carbon that's close to your farm, and to get it onto your farm and grow food into it. And beyond that, you can be creative and use what's available to you. I do recommend leaving it on the surface, however. Here are some leaves, grass clippings, some wood chips that we've left on the surface, and we're going to grow directly into it. So just to sum up, we've got fewer weeds, less work. We've got a nice low fertility release and increased cation exchange capacity, or water and mineral holding capacity in our soils too. Okay, 4th step here, and we're going to close on this. We put Kaizen in place. Kaizen meaning continuous improvement routines. Essentially, that means every year we're going to rinse and repeat. Every year we aim to get rid of a few tools instead of adding a few tools. If we do add a tool, I like to get rid of a tool so that we're not adding a greater number of tools to the farm. We want to get as much work accomplished with as few tools as possible is the principle. So more declutter. Value, more precisely define what, when, and how much. So re-engage those customers, deepen that relationship. After 15, 16 years of growing, we have very deep long-term relationships with customers, and it just takes time. Our culture is one in which we think it's a get-rich-quick culture, and one we think we can develop relationships, meaningful relationships very quickly over the internet. But in reality, it takes time. It takes, I value face-to-face meetings when that's safe to do, and conversation. Get to know your customer. It's a way of respecting your local community. And Muda, get rid of even more of it every growing season. And there's no end. Even after doing this several years, there's no end of Muda still on our farm. And it's a fun challenge that the whole team can participate in. So to close, I want to suggest that there are reasons to lean up or get rid of waste that go beyond profit. There are certainly environmental reasons. It's more sustainable to farm with less waste, but there's another reason too. This is E.F. Schumacher quote. Where's the rich society that says halt? We have enough. The Potawatomi peoples who were here before on our land before us, I think had a better sense of this than we do. Our society has trouble, our culture, and I know I do personally have trouble coming to a satisfactory answer of what's enough. How big of a farm is enough? How much income is enough? How much time to devote to the farm is enough? And I think we need to wrestle with that question as farmers, as citizens in our culture. When do we have enough? And once we can define that point, then we can live happier lives, because we're not constantly grappling for the next thing, for another 5 acres of land, for a better tractor, for more greenhouses. We can be satisfied to say that the size and the constraints that we've defined for ourselves represent enough. I'll close with one last quote from E.F. Schumacher. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. So courage to you as you move in that opposite direction. Thank you for the work that you're doing. You're doing the world's best work, I think, growing food for your communities. And I want you to keep it up and enjoy your work. All right, thanks again for having me.
Great, thanks a lot, Ben. That was some really great information that you had there. So I actually have had a few questions come in to me, and I'm going to start with one while I read what has come in the chat. But at the very beginning, you talked about, when you had the hoop house that blew over the barn, the house, etc., that you had folks come and offer to help with it. How did you tell your story at the beginning? I mean, you said you just marketed about 1.5 miles from the house. How did you market that story to where people really wanted to come out and help you right away?
Yeah, we did a lot of what I would call relationship marketing. We began, like I said, with an 8-foot table at our farmers market. And farmers markets are a hassle, I'll admit. And they're probably our lowest margin of profit, represent our lowest margin of profit in terms of our sales outlets. However, they're just a great way to build relationships. And so we put in a few years at our farmers market and got to know our community, and our community got to know us. And so we had a lot of relationships that we really paid off when we needed our community.
Well, great. A question came in from David, and it says, as a startup, what do you recommend when it comes to your landscape fabric and other similar durable items? We can always go to those big box stores and buy things from landscape fabric to seed trays, but what's the most economical for you and your team over time that you've decided on? What works best for your durable items?
We buy most of our supplies through Knowles. It'd be a Knowles Midwest Produce Supplies, and it's a network of Amish and conservative Mennonite, and around here, I believe they'd be German Baptist, who sell at almost wholesale prices a lot of produce supplies. And they don't have an internet presence. You can find their phone number and their catalog PDF through the internet, but you'll have to drive to a farm to pick up the supplies. And that's worked for us. We have a supply farm within about an hour of us. If you're not within an hour or two, then the greenhousemegastore.com would be an online seller for parts for greenhouses. And then as far as the landscape fabric, you asked specifically about landscape fabric, we buy ours through Knowles. You can also get it through a farmer's friend. And actually any number of places that sell produce supplies now regularly carry landscape fabric too. So I appreciate staying away from Amazon if we can, and support local farmers who are trying to sell produce supplies to other farmers.
Well, great. Jacob, thanks for throwing in the chat. It says that in addition to Nolt's Produce Supply, Matt's Produce Supply is in Jamesport, Missouri, which is a lot closer to Kansas. And another place is Morgan County Seeds in Missouri. So with that, Mary asked a question, and I was curious about this too, that all of your CSA customers live within 1.5 miles of your farm. Is that correct?
Yeah. All of our CS and all of our restaurants too. So we're just really quite fortunate.
Well, great. I want to reflect back. Question came in when you were talking about the metrics and finding value, and you were talking with your restaurants, etc. How long did it really take you to pencil things out and work the system to where you knew what was being able to make a profit for you, having great produce for your restaurants, but it was also a value for them as well? Over time, how long did it really take to tweak those and make good numbers for yourself?
Well, you can pencil out the numbers in an afternoon. That's really not rocket science. And really all we did, pretty much all of our crops take the same amount of effort to seed, take the same amount of effort to transplant, and pretty much the same amount of effort to tend. Tomatoes being an exception, they take twice as long to tend because you have to trellis them. And so you can simplify the math by just calculating your time spent in harvest and post-harvest. And so what you can do, your busiest afternoon, say you have 10 crops that you're harvesting. Well, how many pounds of carrots were you able to harvest and wash and package in a space of 1 hour? How many pounds of green beans, and so on and so forth. And I did this with a clipboard and a blank sheet of paper and just listed our crops. And then how much were we able to process in the space of an hour's time? And I print the results of that are in the Lean Farm Guide to Growing Vegetables. And this is very powerful information. However, we found there are crops that we were able to bring in 5 or 6 times the dollar value per hour as other crops. And so the challenge then is, I would recommend, it's called the Pareto principle. And Pareto principle states that 20% of your time and effort and money and resources are going to produce, are most likely producing 80% of your income. Okay. And then the other 80% of your time and energy resources are most likely producing the remaining 20% of your income. Does that make sense?
Oh.
And so we actually apply this every season, and it's amazing how you can do this year after year, and it still seems to be the case. And so the challenge, though, is to discipline yourself to say, okay, no more asparagus, no more cherry trees, or whatever it is that is in the category of that it's eating up your 80% of your time, but only bringing you 20% of your income.
Yep, that 80-20 rule goes for a lot of things in business with that. Pamela, I had a couple questions here for you. Have you ever looked into programs through Farm Service Agency or contacted your local USDA county office? Have you worked any with federal government programs?
Yeah, mostly through the Conservation Service. And we just over this past winter built another hoop house that was partially funded through the NRCS. And if you're starting out a farm, that's the place to begin, is get yourself a hoop house, and hopefully you can get some help, some funding through the NRCS. We've also put in perennial wildflowers here, crop with help from the NRCS.
Great. I have a question that came directly to me, and they ask, how were you able to work with the city to get the leaves and the grass delivered to you for your compost? How did that conversation go?
I'm kind of an impatient person, and I'm not real good at follow-up phone calls. So I had one of our staff members, Nicole. I said, okay, Nicole, your job is to get leaves onto our farm, and to be as politely persistent, be both polite and persistent, and make that happen. And so she probably made 8 or 10 phone calls and office visits and made that happen. And so I would say choose the most polite and persistent person on your farm and be persistent. And so I think the challenge though is for a new farmer, especially, is to get carbon, organic carbon, anything that was once alive, but in a decompositional state. Find those items: grass, leaves, animal manures, pine needles, whatever it is. It'll decompose and it'll provide carbon and nutrients for your crops. And so what are the lowest cost sources of carbon within 10 miles of your farm? And how can you get those on your farm? That was the challenge we gave ourselves. And in our case, we came up with these local leaves.
Great. Kim has asked a question about her home garden. And then if any of our participants have one last question, we're just about out of time for today, but Kim wants to know about her home garden. So she should not be tilling it, but just mowing, adding compost, and then cover for the winter, or what's the 3 steps with those pieces?
So yeah, in a home garden setting, you certainly do not need to till, and you'll see all kinds of benefits from not tilling. Especially you'll have lower weed pressure and higher biological activity. You'll need to add fewer other nutrients because your biological activity is so high. And so what I would do in a home garden setting is spread compost. Well, after the soil is worked up, I assume you've got some, your yard's worked up or whatever, add thick compost. 6 or 8 inches is not too much. But whatever you can afford, whatever you have available, and leave it right on the surface. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I would let your leaves break down for a year before adding them. But you can still have chunks of leaves and compost particles visible. That's fine. But get a nice thick layer of compost and then just start growing right into it. Don't mix that compost in. Don't till it. Just grow right into it. And then every season as needed, maybe add another 1/2 inch to 1 inch. But it's that first year where if you can afford the time and the resources to set yourself up with good compost around the surface, that will pay off in the long term.
Well, great. We have one last question, then I'll turn it back to Sammy with it. How did you do your CSA recruiting? I mean, you've got a lot of people there within 1.5 miles. How did that process go?
We have 40,000 people within 1.5 miles of our farm here. We're on the edge of a small city. And so that makes it easy. And as far as our recruiting goes, and fortunately, we have enough name recognition that we have to turn away customers, and we have a mailing list that we just go back to every season. At the beginning, however, I would recommend flyers think about where your potential customer is currently purchasing their food. Is it co-ops? Maybe there is a sort of artisan restaurant, coffee shop. Think about where they're currently going to spend money, where they're currently spending money on food, and get in the way. Or set up a booth at your farmer's market to promote your CSA. I've seen farmers do that and be successful too.
Well, great. Thank you very much. What a great presentation. All kinds of tips and tricks to lean things up for our participants and their farms. With that, Sammy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dana, and thanks, Ben. We really enjoyed your
You're welcome.
presentation today, and thanks for answering those questions. Also, thank you for joining us. And to discover more resources, or if you're interested in becoming a From the Land of Kansas member, please go to the link in the chat box and we will drop that, or you can follow us on Facebook and we'll drop that link in there as well. We'll see you back here next Tuesday at 12 p.m. as Susie Badorf joins us with her presentation on growing your passion with profit in the floral industry. If you have questions in the meantime, please email us at fromthelandofkansas@ks.gov, which has been dropped in the chat box as well. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.